Hey guys, it's Hollywood Studios here, and in today's video we're going to be discussing a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a while now, and now that certain parks have implemented this change, it has definitely made this topic much more relevant than it was previously. Six Flags Great Adventure currently does not have any form of a chaperone policy in place, and that begs the question, is Great Adventure and all of the Six Flags parks as a whole going to implement a chaperone policy? The reason this question has to be asked is because numerous parks across the country have implemented such a policy. Most recently, almost all of the Cedar Fair parks have implemented this, including Dorney Park, which is only an hour or two away from Great Adventure. And essentially this bans younger kids, typically those younger than 16 or 15, it depends on the park, from being allowed in the park past a certain time without a chaperone who is of 21 years of age or older. And this is definitely something that I've seen be a little controversial depending on who I talk to. Personally, I think the chaperone policies are a very good idea because, quite frankly, they're needed at this point. Any amusement park you go to, chances are you will wind up encountering an unpleasant guest encounter where people just decide to act like rude idiots for no reason. This is not specific to any park. This happens at just about every park. I've been to tons of parks from here to Texas, all in between, and I've seen tons of rude guest encounters, specifically from kids, whether they're younger kids, teenagers, adults, it doesn't matter. They all tend to cause issues, and I'm not saying this about everyone, it depends on the group of course. There's plenty of kids that go to the parks that are not troublesome at all, but the few bad apples wind up ruining it for the rest of them, and that is why chaperone policies have been put in place at parks. Recently, there were disputes at Kings Island's opening weekend, as well as a couple other Cedar Fair parks, and that's what led to Cedar Fair pulling the trigger on implementing this policy across almost all of their parks. If you want to hear more about their policy, I have a video link below going over Dorney, specifically their policy. It's very similar to that of the entire Cedar Fair chain. But Six Flags parks, very surprisingly, do not have one of these chaperone policies in place. And I say that surprisingly because of a lot of the comments that have been made by the CEO of Six Flags, Salim Basul, especially last year. He complained that rowdy teenagers were disrupting guest experience, and truthfully, if he thought that, I would have thought that a chaperone policy would be in place. Though he has somewhat changed his tune on that sentiment a little bit, however, the problem does still stand. There's still issues at all the Six Flags parks with rowdy guests, specifically those that are kids, and it really does surprise me that a chaperone policy hasn't been implemented yet. Now, I do think there's a lot of pros and cons that come along with implementing such a policy, so that's what I'm about to go over, as it really is an interesting thought to think about, and this is something that could become reality very soon depending on what happens over the next few months. For starters, pros obviously is that these kids will always be under parental watch, not necessarily that of a parent, but someone who's a watchful figure, a guardian, someone who's of a mature age, 21 and older. I do think sometimes that can get a little iffy, because we all know that it doesn't matter what your age is, you could still be an immature idiot. So you could have a 22-year-old who's not necessarily the best role model walking around with a group of 10 kids, and that would technically be in line with the policy at Cedar Fair parks, and they still would cause issues if that is the scenario for that group. I'm not saying again that that's all groups, but that's just something that could happen. It really depends group by group, but I do think overall it would lead to less negative guest experiences. Every time, or at least almost every time, I've had an issue with guests at a park, whether it be Great Adventure, a different Six Flags park, or a park from a completely different chain, majority of the time it's because of kids. They don't know how to control themselves, especially when their parents aren't around. They just feel like they can run amok, act like idiots, and that's what tends to happen at amusement parks since there's so many interesting stimulants going on there. There's a lot going on, lots of fun things to do, and sometimes kids just let their energy get the best of them, and sometimes that can result in very negative consequences, and I do think actions need to be taken against that. Most recently, actually, at Six Flags Great Adventure, and this is not meant to discredit the park at all, I do think they do the best they can, but at Scream Break, which was a pseudo Fright Fest type event, there were kids running around all over the place, almost running into us, running into other guests, and there's really nothing the park can do from a security standpoint. You can't have security guards stationed throughout the entire area. There's just not enough staff for that. And unfortunately, when kids, get stimulated, they kind of go wild. And these kids probably haven't been exposed to Fright Fest like stuff, and it scares them, and they just went crazy, running around, running into people. Even if they didn't mean to, it was still disrupting the guest experience. And if a chaperone policy was put in place, I bet that encounters like that at Fright Fest type events would drop significantly, just because you wouldn't have kids that really shouldn't be running around alone. They would be under the watchful eyes of their parents, and as long as the parents or guardians are actually keeping an eye on the kids, typically they will not do stupid things or disruptive things to other guests. This would also be good for those at higher levels in the park, as a lot of times you have kids that are running around separate from their group. Maybe they don't have their phones, especially at a park like Great Adventure where some rides don't even allow you to have your phones in the queue. It can be very easy to get separated and split up from your group. With the chaperone policy, this really would not be able to happen, again, depending on the actual specifics of the policy. Majority of the time, the group would have to stay together, which I think is a good thing, especially at a giant park like Great Adventure. If you have kids running around who don't have phones or any means of contact for their parents or guardians or whoever took them there, or the rest of their group, that definitely tends to cause issues. I know there's been plenty of times I've gone with a group of friends, maybe we don't have our phones on us because we're riding rides that don't allow you to have them, and the group just gets lost pretty quickly, and it takes a good portion of the day just to regroup and figure out what's next, because of the fact that the park is so big and it's very easy to get lost or separate from your group. I think a chaperone policy would help limit that, and I know it's not necessarily something that affects the majority of guests, but coming from someone who used to be in situations like that, I think that would definitely just be good from a standpoint of not having kids get lost or just negative experiences for them, so that they're not lost and they don't get nervous or anything along those lines. Now, there are plenty of cons that come along with a chaperone policy, and for one, it really gives you a negative reputation with that age group. I know if I was a kid who was, say, 14 years old, just bought a pass for Great Adventure, my mom or dad was going to drop me off there, I'd go have a good time, then they'd come pick me up, and I wouldn't be able to do that anymore, I'd be a little ticked. And that's because a lot of the times parents or guardians simply don't buy a pass for themselves. They kind of see the parks as a bit of a place to drop their kids off and leave, which 9 times out of 10 is what leads to issues happening, and that's why chaperone policies are being implemented in the first place. But again, from the kids' perspective, that would really suck to not be able to go to the park alone, maybe not even at all now, since you need an adult with you. So I think that would definitely be a bit of a PR issue, just for the fact that you get a lot of parents complaining that they can't just drop their kids off anymore, and now they need admission too. It could definitely cause issues. So that really would be something difficult to get over, a big hurdle to jump over. But in the end, I do think it would be worth it to a point. Again, we have to look at the specifics of a chaperone policy that would be put in place, but I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below about a possible chaperone policy coming to the Six Flags park, specifically Six Flags Great Adventure. I know based off of what I've heard from a lot of you guys, this would be something you'd really appreciate. I know typically on crowded days, the biggest issue can be rowdy guests, and a lot of the times, like I said, rowdy guests are teenagers and kids, so that would definitely lessen that. But again, let me know down in the comments what you think about this whole idea. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe to Hollywood Studios, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye, guys.